What's going on, dear friends? Welcome to the Always So podcast, a production of Will Witt's Faith and Marriage. This is Dr. Magis Center, and I pray that you're having an amazing day today. All right, well, happiness is an elusive ideal, and what contributes to it? Why does it feel like happiness is like a game of whack-a-mole when we feel like we get it in one place, all of a sudden it gets misaligned somewhere else? And what does our faith teach us about happiness, and how come living a moral life actually aids in the quest of achieving happiness? Although often sometimes we feel like our faith gets in the way of these things, but it's actually quite the contrary. So to discuss these questions and more, I welcome Father Robert Spitzer, host of Father Spitzer's Universe on EWTN and president of the Magis Center for Faith and Reason, to talk about his new book, The 4 Levels of Happiness, Your Path to Personal Flourishing. In today's episode, we discuss how happiness is the fulfillment of desire, but that there are multiple desires within us, and that sometimes those desires are competing with one another, which is actually all part of God's crazy plan and design for us. Father Spitzer also explains his concept of the 4 levels of happiness and what we can do to pursue them. And we discuss how faith is connected to the highest level of happiness, and that living a moral life is integral to this pursuit that we are talking about. And so if you have enjoyed this episode, please share with one other person who you think would benefit from it. And let's get into this conversation with Father Spitzer. Father Spitzer, welcome to the Always So podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, and thanks for the opportunity, Dr. Cicasa.
Oh my goodness, this is a treasure. I am just honored to have this opportunity to interview you, to be able to have this conversation. I mean, just the work that you do, just trying to really bring a voice of clarity to the relationship between faith and science is such a witness. And I'm grateful for that, because as a therapist who tries to integrate my faith within my work, I recognize and see the value, of course, of trying to honor both of those, and know sometimes that there's tension, in trying to honor our faith as well as trying to honor the science, because sometimes those even though they can live in harmony, but at times they feel like they can be opposed to one another. And so thank you so much for the great work that you've done over the course of your career. So I guess where I'd like to start, just honestly, is just as we move into this conversation specifically about the book that you've written, 4 Levels of Happiness. The rest of the title evades me at this moment. I'm sorry, but talking about the 4 levels of happiness. I heard you give, I said this before, right before we started, but I heard you give this lecture at the Catholic Psychotherapy Association, maybe like 9 years ago or some time ago. Mm-hmm. And so clearly this has been a topic that's been on your imagination and on your mind for some time. Tell us why. Why is this concept of happiness something that you've articulated in previous contexts, in previous books, and why are you bringing it together now in this volume?
Well, 3 reasons, really. The first reason is, I don't have to tell you as a psychotherapist that, the suicide and depression and anxiety levels have just shot up hugely, not just during COVID,
Right.
but literally 12 years before COVID, all the way to, past COVID till today. I mean, we're dealing with about 150, 160% increase in depression, anxiety, and suicides among young people. And that is very disturbing to me, because giving a pill to somebody, as you know, it can be helpful in certain kinds of clinical cases. It can certainly be helpful in various cases of trauma and so forth. But when you're dealing with what I would call the ordinary kind of depression, the ordinary kind of non-clinical, non-traumatic, non-biochemical kinds of things, where people are just plain not happy, or they say they're disturbed, or they're anxious, or they're empty, they're alienated, they're lonely. I don't think we are addressing them, with what I would call both traditional and also with religious kinds of cures. And what I mean by traditional is like the wisdom of the ages, beginning maybe with Plato and Aristotle, but going, of course, right into our own Christian faith and tradition, there are things that are not being considered. And we can't, for example, as I will explain, you can't allow people to just continue in an ego comparative, happiness mode, which I call level 2. If you allow them to do that, they're just going to re-experience all of these negative emotional states from the comparison game. And they're going to continue to experience the emptiness and alienation and loneliness that comes from not being connected to something contributive in the world, from not being connected to God, etc. So I'm going to say is these conditions. I don't care how many pills you give somebody, you might be able to give them some sense of elation or something of that nature, but you're never going to get to the root causes until we finally make up our minds that true happiness is not going to come from material things. It's not going to come from mere pleasure of a good glass of red wine or a good bowl of linguine, and it's not going to come from mere ego comparative satisfactions. I'm achieving more. I'm smarter than everybody. I'm more popular than everybody. I'm more powerful than everybody, etc. Those things can give us a very short-term happiness. Yes, they can give us even a sense of elation. Yes. But at the end of the day, will they truly make us happy? No. Will they leave us wanting, feeling empty, alienated, lonely? Yes. Will they definitely, leave us in the midst of the comparison game, the jealousy, the fear of failure, the fear of loss of esteem, the inferiority, the superiority, the ego rage, the ego blame, the self-pity, and everything else that really contributes to a terrible, yes, it'll just leave us right in the midst of all that negativity. All I can tell you is we need to do something, what I would call, a traditional, a wisdom solution and a religious solution is what I consider to be essential. It's absolutely required. And there's very good evidence for this. And, I was just talking about Dr. Lisa Miller's book, The Awakened Brain, where she shows very clearly by brain scans and a variety of other empirical methods that the religious person is more at peace. The religious person has a deeper sense of security and serenity, a greater sense of emotional stability, but also emotional health, relational health, marital health, and of course, goes without saying, spiritual health. If you're not religiously affiliated, the odds of you not being happy are significantly increased. And this is enhanced and corroborated by the data of Dr. Harold Koenig over at Duke University Medical School, who's also not only looking at the effects of religion on emotional health, but also on physical health. But you all, together, and its contribution does make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Serving others makes a huge difference. In the wider sense, we could call that loving others makes a huge difference, but also religion, connection to something which gives us a sense of ultimate meaning, ultimate identity, ultimate dignity, ultimate hope for the future, ultimate destiny. All these kinds of ultimates were made for them. We need this kind of, absolute groundedness and mooring in our lives. And so if we don't have it, we're profoundly unhappy. I just call it, the symptoms, that are variously described by atheistic existentialists are emptiness, alienation, loneliness, a dread, guilt. Sartre uses very, concrete language like nausea. Camus uses, the overwhelming sense of absurdity. Franz Kafka, in his book, Joseph, the trial, Joseph K. has got that sense of just overriding guilt and dies as he, says, like a dog. They're all have one thing in common. They don't have a religious basis for their lives, for their meaning, for their identity, for their dignity, for their destiny, for their fulfillment. They have no ultimacy. And we are ultimatizers. We were made in the image and likeness of God by God Himself for that very ultimate fulfillment that He alone can give us,
Hmm.
because He alone is the one absolute truth, love, goodness, beauty, and being. So that's what Augustine says: "For Thou
Wow.
hast made us for Thyself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in Thee."
I guess we could stop the podcast right there. I mean, that was incredible. Gotcha. Yeah, I'm fired up, Father Spitzer. Let's go. Come on. Let's do this. Right out of the gates. I love it. Amen. Amen. So you just laid out beautifully, right? This notion that, like, yes, these different levels are important, but ultimately, like, our hearts are made for God. And so
Yeah.
you beautifully spoke about all this research that's out there, as well as just looking at ancient traditions and wisdom that's there. And so I have kind of a question here that I want to kind of
Mhm.
start with here. You speak about the researcher at Duke, and the other book that you mentioned, Awakened Mind, I think is what it was
Mhm.
called, that
Mhm.
speaks to this kind of religious notion that folks who are more religious tend to be happier. But then we also see, in contrast to that, I want to get your insight on this. Something
Mhm.
like the World Happiness Report that is put out yearly, and it does
Mhm.
like a ranking of
Yep.
the happiest countries in the world. And it looks like the happiest countries in the world are almost always like Scandinavian countries. Finland, I think, is number one, and Norway's up there. And those countries, to my knowledge, tend to be more secular in nature. And so,
Yeah.
how do we reconcile both of those?
Well, first of all, you have to look at the kind of polling or opinion polling that is done, and then you have to look at the specific focus. The first thing, of course, is the happiest countries in the world. These are like opinion polls where people go out and say, "Are you happy?" Now, a lot of people will subjectively say, "Yes, I'm happy." But the kind of polling that we're dealing with, and the kind of data that we're dealing with is not just a subjective opinion poll that says, "Are you happy?" In general. And the kind of data we're dealing with are suicides. The
Hmm.
kind of data we're dealing with is number of depressions in that country. In other words, don't ask people, "Are you happy?" Let's look at the depression and anxiety studies that are done independently of, "Are you happy?" Surveys. Let's take a look at, what the percentage is in those countries. How many people are suffering from depression, anxiety, and suicides in those countries? It's high. It's very high. And you can also see at the very same time, that, like I said, the empirical studies, like Lisa Miller's studies of the awakened brain, you can see from the brain scans what is going on. You can see within those contexts, where people are coming from. You also have a very homogeneous population in those countries, and so
Right.
you don't have a lot of the difficulties that come from, as a mixing up cultures in a kind of a pluralism. Also, you have a sort of a uniformity that tends to collect in upon itself. You think, well, we Norwegians are pretty happy people, so I ought to answer yes to this question. But if you start going underneath the data, looking at suicide levels, depression levels, anxiety levels, familial tension levels, divorce levels, et cetera, is not a great statistic. I
Hmm.
mean, by the way, it is, very important also, as I said, to focus specifically on the question of religion. It's happiness in general is too general.
Hmm.
You have to take a look at things and just say, "Are you happy in this context, like family?" Now, I admit that economically, people can be happier in Norway and Sweden, where you have sort of guaranteed kinds of, income levels and a variety of other things, a real control on immigrant status and things of that nature. Also, educationally, I think people might be happier, because, of course, they have a good level of education that's there and things of that nature. But that does not, constitute, an anti-depression, anti-anxiety, pill. In other words, you can see that even though people, consider themselves, yeah, I'm okay. I'm getting along fine. I've got a, good job. I've got a good education. My family members are happy. But you start digging underneath, and boy, I'll tell you, there's a whole lot of movies that come out about existential depression right out of those Scandinavian countries.
Hmm.
I wonder why. I wonder why the literature of those countries has an underlying kind of a depression and anxiety. And I wonder why the depression and anxiety statistics in those countries are rather high. And of course, if everybody's so happy, there seems to be incongruities. And that, of course, it has to,
Hmm.
we have to get underneath it and take a look at some real studies that I think can point specifically, to the question of religion in particular. But, there's just too much in a really generalized happiness study.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that answer. That's fantastic. It's a greatly nuanced and a wonderful response because as you're indicating, and this is something that I've kind of been racking my brain on, in terms of the work that I do and with the podcast. Most of the people who listen to us are religious, and I'm trying to bring a sense of, okay, here's what the science teaches, and trying to show this integrated perspective so that folks who are Catholic, Christian are not afraid or averse to listening to what the science actually teaches about whatever the topic is that we're speaking about. But there's also a part of me that's evangelistic in the sense that I want to be able to communicate to people that the Christian life still is the best option for us. And there's still it's a truth that's there that we've lost. And we need to reclaim that. We need to reclaim this notion that living our Christianity still is the best option for us in terms of personal fulfillment and flourishing, human flourishing, and self-fulfillment and happiness.
Mhm. No, that's true. I wrote another book called The Moral Wisdom of the Catholic Church. And that was my point in that book. In this particular book, I don't go into the specific moral issues of the Christian life. However, I do, in this book, Moral Wisdom of the Catholic Church, I just take the major controversial issues, in other words, the moral issues where people think that the Catholic Church is just out of step, or the Christian church, what I would call a more Orthodox Christian church, is out of step. So, is transgenderism really going to make you happy? Well, no. I mean, the minute you begin, what's called gender affirming therapy, where you're taking, the hormones of the opposite sex of your biological sex, you have a mortality rate increase 3 times higher than the general public. The minute you start, your mortality rate zooms up to 3 times higher for both physical and emotional reasons. Secondly, if you get what we'll call a sexual reassignment surgery, where you take on the appearance of a woman when you were a biological man, or take on the appearance of a biological man, a man when you're a biological woman, when these things are done, the suicide rate, according to Swedish, very Nordic country there, the Sweden 30-year study shows that the suicide rate goes up by 20 times, not 20%, 20 times. That is to say 2,000%. And you look at that and you go, wait a minute, this is not healthy. Something's wrong. So I do point out, in this book, Moral Wisdom of the Catholic Church, on the basis of the secular studies alone. I don't really use religious studies. I don't want people accusing me of religious bias and so forth and so on, or having the study be accused of religious bias. So I go to the Archives of General Psychiatry, university studies, JAMA, the American Medical Association studies, et cetera, et cetera. I take a look at these studies and I can show you the following. Let's suppose you want to live a homosexual lifestyle. You say, well, why not? It's my choice. Oh, it's your choice. You live in America. You can surely do it. But before you do it, just take a look at the statistics from the Archives of General Psychiatry. Your depression rate will go up by 3 times. Your panic attack rate will go up by 5 times. Your substance abuse rate will go up, 3.5 times. Your suicidal contemplation rate will go up 7 times. Your suicide rate will go up 4 times. Hey, wait a minute. This is bad. There's something terribly wrong here. Your major psychiatric, incidents will go up by 2.5 times. This is not my studies, right? These are studies from, Archives of General Psychiatry. And so I'm just citing these things to say, you ought to know this. And the reason is because behind it all is a notion of love. In other words, Christ has this very generative notion of love. It's a love that helps people. It's a love that contributes to people. It's a love that, produces emotional intimacy, closeness, support for other people. It's a love that has commitment intrinsic to it, especially when we're dealing with sexual love, right? And that commitment of friendship. It's a love that is actually, it's hard. It's hard work. There's no question. Commitment is hard work. Caring for others is hard work. Being supportive of others, especially when you're busy, is very hard work. It's all hard work, but that care, that compassion, that emotional intimacy, that generativity, this is really good for us. Because when we have and live according to that notion of love, and we're doing these things, you can see from the statistics that depression levels and anxiety levels just drop right through the floor. In other words, all of a sudden, the people who are at this level do not feel that darkness, emptiness, alienation, loneliness, and dread. They also don't feel the concomitant guilt. They don't feel the depression, the anxiety, the substance abuse, the need for substance abuse, familial tensions, etc. So all of a sudden, you can see, from just looking at the secular data, right? I mean, look at pornography. People, they don't know this, but they think, okay, pornography, it's a victimless sin. The cliche goes. So you say, oh, well, wait a minute, is it victimless or maybe not? For example, do you know that the divorce rate goes up the minute you not become an addict, become habituated to pornography, your divorce rate goes up by 2.5 times. And furthermore, just to let people know, the more often you watch pornography, right? According to standard depression scales, the more depressed you become. Everybody thinks it's the opposite. They think, well, I'm getting elation whenever I'm what, and so I should be happier. But it's that generic notion of happiness. And that's why I have 4 levels. You got to break it down. You got to look at, well, what kind of happiness are we talking about here? And that's very important, because if you don't get the higher levels of happiness, it's really bad news. So my point that I'm trying to make is that if we're nuanced about this, we will see that a Christian lifestyle, following what Jesus asked of us, the kinds of commitments regarding sexuality, the care, compassion, emotional intimacy regarding sexuality that Jesus asked of us, those things tend to be very, very healthy, emotionally healthy, as well as spiritually healthy, relationally healthy, and maritally healthy. So at the end of the day, like I said, on all the major issues, pornography, transgenderism, homosexual lifestyle, cohabitation, even artificial birth control. And then when I get into the life issues of euthanasia and abortion and eugenics and things of that nature, if we live according to the moral teachings of Jesus, we are not just going to be happier in the sense of emotionally healthier. We are also going to be happier on levels 3 and 4, that is to say, contributive and ultimate or transcendent happiness. And we're also going to be relationally healthier, maritally healthier, and of course, spiritually healthier.
So help us understand, you've been talking about level 3, level 4. We've been throwing these terms around so far in the interview. Let's let the audience know, what are the 4 levels of happiness?
Sure. On the first level, we can call that material and pleasure. So it's the kind of happiness that gives me a pleasure from outside. We might call it a sort of euphoric feeling from the outside. Bob Spitzer smells the bowl of linguine with extra garlic, lunges towards it, wolfs it down, and he says, I'm happy. Right. Of course, he's experiencing the pleasure of that bowl of linguine, and he would like another bowl of linguine because it will make him happy. But really, as we'll see in a moment, it's a superficial happiness. It doesn't last very long. It doesn't really involve, our qualitative, our spiritual, our ideal, intellectual, creative nature. It's pretty much our taste buds. And so forth. We can also get that same level one happiness from material things. So that's level one. It's material, it's pleasure. It doesn't last very long. It doesn't connect us with our higher selves. Yet at the same time, it's got an intense kind of a happiness. And you could kind of live for material things and for pleasure. I drink my bottle of Chateau Margaux every night. Well, you could do that. It costs you a lot of money. But at the end of the day, it won't bring you true happiness. Boy, you could get depressed on the other three levels big time. Let's go to level two happiness. This is the bane of our culture. About 70% of us view level two happiness as kind of our dominant form of happiness. If we do level two and we get lots of level two, we'll be a success. We'll be happy. Our life will be worth living. We'll be valued. So what is it? It's ego comparative happiness. I'm just going to give you a set of questions that dominates, the central viewpoint within our culture. Who's achieving more? Who's achieving less? Who's got more power? Who's got less power? Who's more popular? Who's less popular? Who's more intelligent? Who's less intelligent? Who's more athletic? Who's less athletic? Who's more talented? Who's less talented? Who's more beautiful? Who's less beautiful? You know the old questions, the ego comparative questions. And if I come out on top, I'm happy. When somebody says, Bob, you are a great chess player and you have achieved much, I say, keep talking about that because, of course, it makes me happy.
Absolutely.
However, that ego comparative happiness, it doesn't last very long. And if you start living for it, that's the only thing that's going to make you happy. That's what you're living for. And you're focused on that and you're not focused on anything else. Let me just give you a set of emotions that you will soon recognize. Jealousy, number one. Fear of failure. Fear of loss of esteem. Well, depression from inferiority. Depression from superiority. I'll explain that in a moment. Ego rage. Egoists can be oftentimes the most miserable people. They look, again, going back to your Swedish studies, your Nordic studies, and you go, they're very happy people. But, I'll tell you one thing, you don't want to be misled by the culture of narcissism. Just because you belong to the Mensa Society doesn't mean you're going to be happy. Just because everybody's oohing and awing over your fantastic intellect or beauty or athleticism doesn't mean you're going to be happy. Something's missing. Let's take a look at some of the things that happen to winners. First of all, of course, winners are very contemptuous. And St. Augustine made this observation that, contemptuous people are generally very lonely. I'm telling you right now, be prepared to be alone. Augustine is correct. When you get to that point, you hold everybody in contempt, they'll hold you as just, a person they don't want to be around. You're going to find yourself very lonely and very resentful. That stands right at the heart of Nietzsche's ressentiment, right? That whole idea of I resent you, you should have groveled, and you didn't grovel, and now you're going to have to pay. So that's one form of misery. There's another form of misery, too, where, the egoist can't make a mistake in public. I remember, when I was a kid, in a physics class in high school, and I was giving a talk, and I was calling spectroscopy, because I'd never heard it pronounced before. I had read about it, in the astronomy, texts and so forth. And so I'm busy giving this thing, and this kid comes up to me afterwards and says, Spitzer, that word spectroscopy, you pronounce it spectroscopy 3 times. Now everybody in the class thinks you're a consummate idiot. And of course, I went home, I played the tape 1,000 times and had suicidal feelings before I went to sleep. For making a mistake in pronunciation, isn't that sort of overreacting to the problem? Yeah, but we do it in this culture all the time. The ego he can't make the mistake. Plus, he's built up, or she's built up, right? The big facade around perfection. Don't want to make any mistakes. And of course, if you do, oh man, you'll live with the consequences. And there are a bunch of other things that happen to winners. Winners, they're going to reach a plateau. There's always going to be somebody higher. There's always going to be someone who comes along. But remember, when you're living for level 2 alone, the person who comes out higher is always a threat. And you're always over against them. How do I block it? Et cetera. These are not happy people, as Hegel calls them. The unhappy consciousness.
And I've heard stories also of like Olympic athletes that after they win the medal, sometimes you'll see that a number of them will get depressed, or people after they win, athletes after they win championships. Similar, it's like you work so hard to get this thing, and you realize it's not enough. So level 1, just recapping, is pleasure. Material things. Level 2 is this ego comparative success. And in the points you make in the book and you're making now is that it's not that these are bad in and of themselves, that there's the bowl linguine isn't terrible. Like, it's okay. We can consume
have it all the time.
Exactly. And having a healthy sense of wanting to perform well, isn't bad either in the sense that in that we're called to be good stewards of the talents that God gives us. And so we want to make good use of those things. It's that when these things become an end to themselves, or when they're distorted, or when there's a lack of a proper hierarchy and a lack of a proper balance, that's when those things become, idolatrous and become problematic.
You're right on the marker, Dr. Sconsi. That's exactly it. And so when you make it an end in itself, this is the only thing that'll really bring my life purpose and success and value. That, boy, get out of the way. Be prepared for a life of misery. And by the way, you're going to make everybody around you miserable too. You're going to drag everybody with you.
All right, dear friends, I'm taking a break here from a conversation with Father Spitzer to want to encourage you to check out previous episodes of the Always Hope podcast on this topic of happiness. This is something that's integral into our understanding of emotional health and well-being. This concept of happiness comes up often, and so it's something that we're just not going to be able to fully exhaust in one particular episode. So if you have enjoyed this conversation and you're looking for other episodes that cover this topic, well, check out episode 125, What is Happiness, with Dr. Charles Namath, as well as episode 81, What Makes Us Happy, with Dr. Carlos Gomez. In both of these episodes, we just dive into different aspects of this conversation related to happiness so that you can help your life, so that you can set up your life to be able to achieve the happiness in whatever degree that God is calling us to have it. So I got you covered when it comes to the pursuit of happiness. Got many questions here. This is just phenomenal. All right, so let's wrap this up. Let's round it, not wrap this up. Let's round it out. Okay. Level 3. What's level 3? So people know what we're talking about.
They're that's contributive happiness. So it's the opposite of level 2. Level 2 wants to shift the locus of control and attention to me, whereas now level 2 wants to shift the locus of control to me. Level 3 now wants to move it outside of me. I want my life to make a difference to the world. I want the world to be better off for my having lived. So you make this transition, and all of a sudden you begin to say, I don't want to get to 80 years old and go, now what was the difference between the value of my life and that of a rock? And have to say, well, I didn't make much difference to anybody or anything, or to any ideal or to any principle. I didn't do anything for anybody. I basically was a big, nothing burger in my life, and the rock probably did more than me. If you say that, you're going to be in incipient despair for sure.
Mm.
Now, the main thing, though, is we don't just want to get to the end of our lives and say, boy, I should have given myself some meaning, some good, some contribution, made a difference to family and friends. We truly are built to make an optimal contribution to people in our lives. And we want to make an optimal, positive difference to our families, to our friends, to our churches, to the kingdom of God, to our community, to the organizations with whom or for whom we work, to the culture, to the society, if we're so lucky. So essentially, we want to make an optimal, positive difference. And when we do, we say, I'm happy. I'm happy I made a difference to that person. I'm getting a jolt of not just my life has value because I made a difference to this person in the world. It's not just what I would call it's a wonderful life kind of, happiness.
Yeah.
Jimmy Stewart, you remember that movie?
It's phenomenal.
Movie.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, exactly. It's a perfect level 3 movie.
Yeah.
And of course, he basically figures out, wow, without me, in this wonderful town that I'm living in, Bailey's, whatever crossing or something, would have been Pottersville. So the main thing, though, is if you really look at that sense of happiness, it does come from the George Bailey sort of thing, but it also comes from this sense that empathy is promoted and real connection with people is promoted when you help them, you serve them, you make a difference. And I don't care what anybody says. The person who is empathetically connected, who takes, care of others, is empathetically connected to those people. They love him or her, and he or she loves them. And that is a very good happiness-producing thing. It's a genuine kind of love. Our lives mean more when we're together because we have contributed, cared for, supported one another. So we were meant for that. We were built for that. And that's level 3. And I would simply say that level 3 is one of the best cures. All those eco-comparative negative emotional states I just talked about that I call the comparison game, they all go into decline. All the narcissistic stuff with the emptiness, the alienation, it all goes into decline. The jealousy, the fear of failure, fear of loss of esteem goes into decline. The minute you feel like you're in a genuine loving relationship where people like being around you, you like being around them, and you come alive through them, they come alive through you, there's something happy about that state. And there's also something very happy about saying, at the end of the day, I made a difference. My life wasn't a nothing burger. Now, there's the 4th level, by the way, this is not just a Christian deal. The 4th level is transcendent or ultimate happiness. But as I said, it's not just Christian or Judeo-Christian. It's really Plato, Aristotle, they all knew that we are ultimatizers. In other words, we desire not just some truth, but perfect truth. Not just some love, but perfect love. Not just some goodness or fairness. We want perfect fairness and goodness. Not just some beauty, but perfect beauty. And not just some kind of home, but perfect home. This is what we want. We're built for it. And ironically, interestingly, we want to give this away to others. And so, in other words, we would like to do that, but alas, we have to learn that we can't give it to others and others can't give it to us. Perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and hope, that's got to come from, God himself. And there's some very good reasons for that philosophically. We're built for that ideal, but it's not just for perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and hope. What Rudolf Otto, in his very fine book, The Idea of the Holy, he talks about, the numinous experience. Like there's something genuinely, personally, transcendently spiritual that's in us.
Hmm.
And we sense that interior. He calls it the Numen, Numen.
Hmm.
And there's something in us, this Numen, and we kind of know it's there. We know that it kind of is fascinating. It's mysterious. It's inviting. It is calling us, in a sense. And either we relate to the spiritual, and we connect with that inviting, fascinating, mysterious, holy other. He calls it WHOLLY, holy other, spiritual, entity, personal entity within us, or we can ignore it. Either way. But when we ignore it, genuinely, that's where the emptiness, alienation, loneliness, dread, malaise starts. That's where, if you just ignore it completely, that you get out of this personal relationship with the holy, with the transcendent, the spiritual, however we want to designate. Of course, in Christianity, we call it God, but whatever you call it, there is this interior sense of the sacred, this interior sense that I am more than the profane, this interior sense that I need redemption, this interior sense that I need to be related to a being of infinite and absolute and ultimate dignity and being and truth and love and beauty. I have to be related. I was meant for this. My tati einai in Greek, right? My what I am meant to be, right? And so the idea is, Pope Francis wrote this, infinite dignity encyclical, well, where would that come from? Well, we don't have infinite dignity in ourselves. We have infinite dignity when we are in relationship to the being that gives us that infinite dignity, that gives us that fulfillment in himself. In other words, we are not autonomously infinites, where, we have that infinite, unsuppressible dignity in relationship to the infinite one, the ultimate one, the ultimately perfectly true, good, loving, beautiful one, the sacred one, as all religious traditions would call it. There is where the dignity, the ultimate, the infinite dignity begins to manifest itself in us. And the closeness of that relationship, really, that's why Lisa Miller finds, right? You start relating to
Right.
that being. And we're not just talking about, I believe in that being. That's intellectual conversion. But spiritual or religious conversion is when I say, I'm relating to that being, acknowledging that being, praying to that being, accountable to that being. When I'm relating to that being in those ways, right, it's at that point that something begins to flow into me. Not just
Yeah.
ultimate meaning and ultimate purpose, ultimate dignity and ultimate fulfillment, ultimate hope, and so forth. Those things, yes, definitely are there. But there's something else that's flowing into me. It's almost a sense, as I said before, of being moored in it. And so we are ultimatizers, but we're not just like perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty. No, we want an ultimate relationship with the sacred, the transcendent, the spiritual. We want, a relationship with perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and home itself. God is there interiorly in those people and calls them to relationship with Him, with the sacred one, with transcendence, in various ways. And of course, we believe in Christianity that this expression comes in Jesus' specific notion of love. And of course, when we're there, we truly are at peace.
Yeah.
As
Amen.
Augustine says, when we rest in Him.
Amen. What I appreciate about the four levels as you articulate them is that they they certainly map up cleanly with something like Martin Seligman's work on positive
Yeah.
psychology, and where he speaks about the pleasant life, the good life, and then the meaningful life.
Hmm.
But he doesn't quite get to that fourth level that you're
He
speaking about.
doesn't.
And,
Yeah.
and even the Harvard study of happiness, this 80-year study that's been going
Hmm.
on, where they've been following these Harvard students compared with those from the poorer end of Boston. In the book, The Good Life, that is just recently released, it kind of summarizes a lot of this research. It also speaks beautifully about what I would say the level 3 that you're communicating, this notion
Hmm.
of friendship, but not just friendship, but the quality of our life is really contingent on the quality of our relationships and the way that we give, and that those things are more meaningful than how much money we make, how much we have, all of that, absolutely. But still, even those studies don't get into any sort of questions related to religious affiliation or religious practice, which also kind of boggles my mind a little bit, especially because it's coming from Boston, where probably a lot of the people who are being followed probably were Catholic themselves. But nonetheless, that's a different kind of question to be asked. And so, just to make this proposal that there is this missing component, that psychology, even positive psychology, as well intentioned as good as it is still missing an element here. And this
Yeah.
element is exactly what you've been articulating.
And like I said, the Lisa Miller studies there
Yep.
in the Awakened Brains for Good book that Dr. Harold Koenig studies at Duke University Medical School. By the way, a lot of those are free of charge. You can get them now. Not just, he does a lot of studies on correlation between religion and emotional health, and and religion and the success of psychological therapy. So you combine psychological therapy with religion, you
Yeah,
get
that's great.
excellent results compared to just good results, without the religion. And then with respect to physical health as well, he's got some very, very good, interesting correlations in the studies he's done, and chronology and cardiology, et cetera. So all these
He sounds like a great guest for the podcast. Hopefully, maybe I can get him at some
absolutely.
point. I'd
Harold
love to
Koenig,
get him on
yeah,
the show.
dude.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's good.
So I got another question for you. This is
Sure, fire.
fantastic. All right. So all right, we're speaking about these 4 levels, and the 4th level, of course, being at the highest of the hierarchy, and everything else kind of flowing within that.
Hmm.
So, but then why?
Hmm.
Why dopamine? Why does dopamine get in the way? Right. So like, why is it that like we know that we can, I don't know, the marshmallow study, even we can go back to that. If you just sit here and wait for this marshmallow, don't eat this one marshmallow, you can get 2. There's a different class of personality between the kids who eat the one marshmallow
Yeah.
versus those who wait for the 2. We have those studies as well. But
Hmm.
then even just in our own experience, it's like I can sit and I can read a book, or I can just doom scroll on my phone. I can
Hmm.
listen to contemplative music or something that's really going to give me some rest, or I can just binge YouTube.
Yeah.
I can, fall into any sort of kind of hedonism, base level desire, or I can genuinely pursue those things that are going to be eudaimonia, things that are generally going to lead towards my flourishing.
Hmm.
And at times, even though we're talking about it, and it feels like it's, yes, of course, that's the greater good. But my goodness, sometimes those low hanging fruits, they're pretty compelling in the moment. And
Oh, yeah, there's
why, why just, but why would the Lord create us with such a complexity of desires within us? And sometimes these baser desires really just do get the best of us.
well, one word, freedom.
Yeah,
He
amen.
wants us to freely choose to move toward which one of these views of happiness is going to predominate in our lives. Now, it's true. If you ask a child, do you want 100 candy bars, or or do you want to go to church?
100 candy bars all the way. Let's go, Father. Is that an option?
That's right. So,
You can ask a lot of adults and they may give you
right, right. Oh, it's certainly another category at one point. But even as a child, I did kind of like going to church,
Yeah.
but I liked it. There was a different kind of happiness, right? It's a more transcendent happiness. It's a global happiness, but and of course, it's deeply spiritual and transcendent happiness. So you kind of you go through the stages on life's way, right? You go to ego comparative happiness. You become an adolescent. You're going to get into ego comparative. You got to prove yourself. You got to be an individual, right? I mean, it's culture we live
Yeah.
in. and so
Some of
forth.
that's developmental. Some of that's developmental. Some of that's appropriate for
Absolutely.
adolescents to start spreading their wings, getting outside of the family, trying to understand who they are, differentiation. So all of that I understand is development. But the point is, if we get stuck there, we keep going. Sorry.
That's
Yeah.
the problem. And of
Yeah.
course, Instagram and social media
Oh yeah.
really helps a lot of kids to get stuck there.
Yeah, it
And
does.
that's why the suicide rates and the depression anxiety rates have gone up 150, 160%, just in like 17 years. It's mind-boggling,
Yeah. Yeah.
how just
Yeah.
skyrocketing young people. They're people say young people are happier. They're not happier.
They're
No,
not. No.
you
No.
are
No.
quite wrong in this. And every sociological study you look at is screaming out, no, they're not. The advice of the popular culture is wrong. Christian morals, that will help them be happier. Being grounded in God, that will make them be happier, more secure, and so forth. You look at that and you say, well, they look so happy. But on the other hand, when you start looking at the statistics, they're not that happy.
Hmm.
And so, again, God calls us, but He doesn't force us. There's just, like I said, what happens and the way God works is there's just going to be a little bit of that loneliness for, a cosmic relationship with Him. Well, we're built for that, right? There's just going to be a little sense of, I'm way too profane. The sacred. I need the sacred. I need the holy. I need, something outside of the profane. There's something missing. I'm dreading something. Joseph K. Gosh, what a put together guy. But he's not really a put together guy. He's, underneath it all, there's something, missing, something unmoored, something detached, something very lonely, a kind of, as I say, you look into the mirror and nothing is looking back at you, feeling of absence, lack of substance, if I can put it that way. Why do I feel that sense of emptiness in the pit of my stomach when I'm shaving? Or why I'm surrounded by my friends and my family do I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm still lonely. There's still something. Why, I'm taking a walk outside and I feel like I don't fit in. I'm not at home in the totality. I'm not at home here. Of course, it's not ultimate home. And of course, we start driving each other crazy. Would you please be ultimate home, ultimate happiness, ultimate responsiveness, ultimate understanding for me, and I'll do the same for you. Well, of course, get ready, as the Princess Bride line goes, for disappointment, right? I mean, there's, you know, nothing we can do about it. We can't be ultimate home, ultimate responsiveness, ultimate understanding, ultimate support, ultimate, ultimate for anybody,
Hmm.
any more than they can be for us. And the very fact that we try to extract ultimate love from another finite human being and then allow them to extract ultimate love from us, you know, I mean, we're going to go crazy trying to be authentic 24/7. And by the end of the day, we will know that we are not ultimate, unselfish, unmitigated, transformative love for the other. And they're going to know the same for us. So, I mean, we need God. That, and who's going to take care of you? God. You just have to get back to what you were meant to be. You're Tatiana. You are meant to be in relationship with God. He's your ultimate hope, ultimate love, ultimate goodness. Other human beings can't do that for you. Only God can do it for you. And if you just pray to Him, if you relate to Him, if you connect with Him as if He matters, don't worry. You will have the peace that you did not have. Are you still going to suffer in life? You're still going to have crosses? Yeah, you're still going to suffer in life. You're still going to have crosses. Things are going to happen to you. On the other hand, though, they're much more manageable when you have God, because it's not just psychologically having God. It's God having you and gracing you and supporting you and holding you up with His love, holding you up with that sense of being filled instead of being empty. that sense of being at home instead of being alienated. And of course, I rest my case. I mean, God is doing something for us. The Newman is filling us with his presence. And that's what we were meant for, to be in relationship with him.
Yeah. And I could say, as somebody who's been practicing my faith for a number of years now, over 20 years, I mean, there are moments in the spiritual life where you do hit these periods of desolation. And I know in the book, we don't have time to get into all of it. I know the book, you beautifully articulate kind of an introduction to the discernment of spirits and consolation, desolation, and why the Lord allows that. And there's been moments of, intense, crisis of faith, those type of things that have emerged over the course of my life. And I can say it's challenging and it's real. And so even for people who are practicing their faith, you may still experience some of these hardships. But the point that you're making, it's one that I still fundamentally agree with, is that at least there's some buffer, there's some boundary, that God is there. And it's like in Scripture, they say that even I go to Sheol, there you are. There's no place I can go. There's no end that I can get to that you wouldn't be there, that you wouldn't find me.
Yeah.
And that notion is very comforting. Even if I can't feel God all the time, or even if my present suffering is something that is very palpable, at least acknowledging and recognizing and knowing that you're not alone does change the way that you deal with whatever the cross is that you're carrying.
Well, and that, we believe as Christians, not all religions would believe this, but we believe as Christians, as we move into the next life, that suffering will be over. All tears will be wiped away. And we do really have that sense. And, it's like Mother Teresa. If you said to Mother Teresa, gosh, are you in a state of desolation? Yes. Are you unhappy? No. No. So wait a minute. You don't feel anything? You feel empty when you're around God? Yes. That he's not present to you. You don't feel his presence like you used to. Yeah, that's right. I feel that sense of desolation. I'm journeying alone, all by myself. Well, how come you're not unhappy? Well, it's true, because I'm serving people is one reason. But the other reason that she's not unhappy is because she knows in her faith that God is definitely calling her, that he's purifying her right now, right? Detaching her from the consolations that she is to enjoy. But through her faith, she is offering this up for all the people that she's serving. Through her faith, she knows she's being purified, by going through this dark night of the soul, through this desolation. She knows in her faith that every tear will be wiped away. She knows that these challenges are going to come to an end. She knows that even though she can't feel God, she can feel the support of God in his providence as he opens these doors in front of her. Like, I'm a blind guy, right? And so, I wasn't always blind, but for the last 5 years I've been blind. And I can tell you, it's a very interesting experience because, you have to trust. You have to trust in God. But it's not just trusting God to get you through the blind moments. I can see more and more how God is maneuvering something to be happening over here, or more and more how he's opened the door of opportunity for my apostolate over there. Or, and so forth and so on. So in other words, I know that God is very active in my life, and as she did, that, listen, her religious order is like growing by leaps and bounds as she's in the midst of desolation. Well, is she taking joy in the fact that she's serving more people? Her religious order is growing. Everything is going well. God's, blasting open doors of opportunity in front of her. Yes, of course, she's happy. But again, it's a kind of a level 4 happiness. It's not necessarily a felt happiness. We mix up sometimes the feeling of happiness with genuine happiness. But you can definitely have happiness from being aware of the good that's coming out of your life, or aware of how God is inspiring you and protecting you and guiding you and helping you, that you're walking with him, right? It's perfect, Psalm 23 deal, right? Okay, even though I walk in the shadow of the valley of death, that means that feels terrible, feels like darkness, feels like I'm alone. I fear no evil, for you are at my side. I know you're at my side. With your rod and your staff, You're guiding me, helping me, protecting me, right? And so, of course, that's the kind of happiness that she has, even amidst the desolation. And like I said, going blind was not easy. I got used to seeing people's faces and looking at mountains and seas. And so you get deprived of it and you think, oh gosh, my life's losing quality of life here. But boy, when you are detached and you are dependent on others, you love others more and you appreciate others more. And of course, you're never, if you don't have to stop anything. God will open doors. You'll start, while I was, going blind, I'm publishing 18 books, starting the Magis Center, making a bunch of videos, trying to basically produce curriculum for high school and middle school, and doing a bunch of other things, and being the blind priest on Father Spitzer's universe. I mean, eyesight is definitely overrated, in the sense that do you need it for your happiness? No, you don't. You think you do initially, but then, of course, God has his ways. He really has his ways. He nudges in, he sometimes blasts in, or he blasts in front of you and opens doors. He's providentially protecting, inspiring, and guiding. He's something else. So anyway, I know I'm going on and on here, but
I appreciate it.
It's very true. You can have felt desolation, what we call affective desolation, but you can be in spiritual consolation. That is to say, very much aware of how God is working through you, how God's working through your suffering, how the suffering that you have is offered up for the people you're serving, and of course, how God is operating through this suffering, not only to purify you, but to even use that purification to make a difference to the world. So that's, you can, like I said, affective desolations can affective means felt. Desolations can basically lead to, and during the dark night of the soul, frequently does lead to spiritual consolation, where you can actually see, God working through you and God working in you to not only make the world, but the church a better place.
Well, Father Spitzer, this has been a delightful time. I could certainly have kept you for another hour, but I want to honor your time and mine here. And so as we're just kind of wrapping up our conversation, if anybody's interested in learning more about you, what's the best way to get a hold of you or to see you?
Sure. Well, one thing is our website, magiscenter.com. That's MAGIS center.com. A lot of good free material there. For people who are interested in happiness levels, as well as the whole intersection of faith and science. My email is Spitzer at Magis, MAGIS center.com. And you can also, obviously, I have Father Spitzer's Universe on EWTN on Wednesdays and Fridays and Sundays. And so those are some ways to connect, at least to see what we're up to here at the Magis Center.
Well, praise the Lord. Well, we'll have links to those websites in the show notes. And Father Spitzer, final question, ask all my first-time guests, what gives you hope?
Oh, God gives me hope. Jesus Christ gives me hope. The church gives me hope. And, of course, the life I lead gives me hope. And it's all one big package. But really, fundamentally, even though sometimes the wrapping's coming off, the bow on top is still there.
Amen. Amen. Great answer. Okay. Well, I appreciate your time. God bless you.
God bless you too. That's the gospel.
All right, everybody. Well, that does it for my conversation with Father Spitzer. I was absolutely delighted to have him on the podcast. I mean, such a brilliant mind. And what a gem to be able to have on the show. I'm so grateful for his time and for his energy that he brought to today's episode. Clearly, you can hear that he's passionate about this topic. And so if you have found this episode helpful in any way, please, I ask that you please write a rating or leave a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Every one of those little comments helps tremendously to be able to get the word out for this show. And if you think that this episode's been helpful for you, then again, please share it with somebody else who could learn a little bit more about Father Spitzer's work when it comes to these 4 levels of happiness. Well, many blessings to you, my dear listeners. I hope that you all are having a wonderful day today. And God bless you. God bless you. Know that we are praying for you and cheering you on wherever this episode may find you, that it may support you and encourage you and edify you wherever you may be. So many blessings to you on your journey of faith. And we'll catch you on the next episode. God bless.